Okay, so I'm not 100% sure if we're streaming yet, so let me know when you hear me. Possibly right now, we might be live. Broadcasting live from an empty room in UOIT, UA. Be nice to know if anybody's actually able to hear me. Everything's going okay. Yeah, leave this page. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, share the link around if possible, I guess. I'm not 100% sure if everybody will actually show up to this. So yeah. Okay. So I'll give a few minutes to people, or for people to show up today, just in case, to get a little bit more numbers. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so I got live chat on my phone, so I can see you guys. You guy. Can you paste images into the YouTube chat, or is it just emojis? Check that out. I doubt it now that I say it out loud. But yeah. Okay, so I'm getting bored. I'm just going to start, and if you guys are interested in listening to earlier sections of this, you can just rewind it if you're watching this live. And if you're watching this via archive, then yeah, just stay tuned. So today we're going to be talking about speeding things up with scripting. A very easy topic to get started on because scripting is very simplistic. You don't need to worry about much, and it's like super powerful, right? It totally changes the way you operate as a system administrator / IT guy. Okay, so it sounds like my MacBook fan has officially started, so if you are having troubles hearing me, let me know. Okay, so you guys are probably wondering why should I bother learning scripting? It's a new language, you know, like it requires effort, and that usually turns off a lot of IT guys if it's not like 100% required. So basically, it gives you more control of your system. So anything really, it's super versatile. So if you learn a general scripting language, you can apply it to multiple programs as well as to operate the OS. So for instance, we're going to be going over some secure CRT scripts. So secure CRT actually allows you to input a Python script, a JavaScript script. I'm sure many others. Oh, VB, all that. Thanks. It's Helvetica whatever for the font for this. So yeah, so anyway, going back to that. Scripting is also great because of the fact that it just deals with the grunt work of just boring medial tasks of having to do small things like going through text files, double checking Word files and stuff like that. You could just create a script and get that all done, right? Especially with a more versatile language like Python. File in and out is super easy. And most of the time, if you're in a junior position or if you're in a starting position in a company, you're going to be doing a lot of the work that no one actually wants to do. And scripting is the perfect way to speed up that work. Within reason, of course, because I have gone into an interview and I was talking with the IT manager, right? And he was talking about how a student intern got a little too hyped on the fact that he could script things to get things done, and he spent more time scripting than actually getting things done. So this is why we're going to be going over Python, right? So if we are in that junior level position and we're just doing a little bit of scripting, and then we can automate a lot of like boring tasks, we're essentially just getting paid to watch loading bars load, and then that's it. We don't have to worry about anything. We just watch it, make sure it works okay, verify, go do something else, come back. You know, it makes life easier. Yeah. Okay. So why are we doing Python? Python is a really good starting point for scripting since it's so easy to read the syntax. So you can read it and generally understand what's happening. Yeah, so you can generally understand what's happening. Sorry, I took a glance at the chat. And it's super easy for beginners. It has a huge community. By huge, I mean medium at best, but it has a really active community. So it's kind of like how JavaScript basically has a whole bunch of .js packages, and it's basically like you can say anything and then .js, and that's a package, right? It's the same way, but with Python, .py, whatever, like Jupyter, and many other packages or libraries, and it's supported very well by like IBM. Everybody generally likes Python as a scripting language, not necessarily an application language. So you might want to have like just a very easy graphic interface, but besides that, it's just supposed to do things behind the scenes and you can't see it. Okay, so it also has really great support for networking. So all of the networking students, we can actually jump into Python and talk about all the stuff that we learned in CCENT, CCENT? Yeah, or CNT, I don't know, whatever, the CCENT. So all of the small like packet switching and all that kind of stuff, watching packets come in, you can easily get into that and see the nitty-gritty details of what's actually happening on the network. You can set up sockets, and if you're interested in that, check out Black Hat Python and double check, just Google it and see if you can get a copy. It's fairly cheap, but it's fairly available via PDF online. I believe there's more updated versions. Yeah, and a lot of arguments against Python for scripting is that it's not native to the OS in some cases. So like for instance, you have to install on Windows and all that kind of stuff. So it's not going to be doing anything like PowerShell or anything like that, or Bash, right? It's not going to be as plug and play as those languages for their respective operating systems, but it can still make system calls with syntax that is much easier to understand, that you don't actually need to be Googling to make sure that you're not going to be like removing some drive or like deleting a file or sending out the wrong input or output, that kind of thing. So you can feel like you're doing more control within Python if you're a beginner. And we're going to go over some examples. So I'm going to do a very short, well, not very short. I'm going to go over some very easy Python files to show you what's happening. I'm going to run them, and I'm going to just talk our way through it. So is the text size okay? Are you guys able to see everything okay? Or should I up the text size for this? How about what I will do is go into OBS and switch to this view. Whoop. Okay, so here we go. Yep. Oh, sass from Brock in the chat. Perfect. Everything's going well then. So what I'm going to be using is Atom, just a very basic text, versatile text editor to do some basic manipulation of Python scripts. So didn't intend that to sound as fancy as I did, but here we go. So to get started, usually you would import whatever kind of packages you would want to use, and it's as simple as just typing import and then whatever, like flying, if you're XKCD fan. So right off the bat, this right here, line 1 is how you would normally set up a function, right? So we're naming it main. If you have much programming experience, you're used to the main in C or C++. Please enlarge. Okay. Font size, let's go with 20. 20 okay? Yeah, that looks much better. At least from my point of view. I'm going to wait for the stream to catch up, and then I'll jump right back in. Perfect. Okay, so hello?
Is it possible?
No.
No, it's okay if I work in the back?
I'm doing a live stream. Sorry.
Sorry?
I'm doing a live stream right now for a club.
My bad.
Yeah, no problem. Don't worry about it. Have a great day, man. Again, I'm going to reference live streaming from an empty room. So we might have a few more interruptions, or if you're on campus or around, you can drop by. I won't mind. Or you can just keep watching. It doesn't really matter. So basics of Python. So if you're used to C style programming, you can actually use this the main function. But that's not technically required. You can just list off a whole bunch of commands or lines of code, and it will just execute. But if you want to use functional programming or classes, it's usually best practice to just have a main file. That way you can organize it better. You don't have to put all the functions at the top. Since it is a scripting language, that means it is going to be interpreted. So the Python interpreter will read line by line until it gets to, we'll just execute line by line. So it has to understand that you're using a function and all that. So if you do it this way, you have to call it again at the bottom. So here. So Python interpreter will run through, get all of this information into understand it, and we'll be able to run everything, including functions, classes, whatever. So yeah, starting slightly more complicated mid-level, but if you were lost up to this point, we're going to go back to super simple. So syntax-wise, if you want to print something in Python 3 and above, you just do print and then brackets and the double quotes. Okay, and in here you can actually put whatever. You can go like this is a variable, whatever, right? The reason for this is because Python 2 is an older version and it uses slightly different backend stuff for the interpreter. 3 is newer and uses more reliable stuff for the interpreter. So a lot of Python users use 2 point whatever still, but in the future it's going to be deprecated, and I'm just going to be referencing Python 3 from now on. Okay. So I was talking about a variable before. So for the variable, we can just simply say like the name of it equals whatever, right? It will just be initialized on the spot. Python has the beauty of something called loose typing. So that means that it will just you just assign a variable and it will try and interpret what that variable actually is. So if it's a integer, string, whatever, it will try and interpret it to the best of the abilities. Now, if you noticed, the code actually looks really clean, right? So there's like white spaces, it looks well organized, but you also notice the fact that there's no brackets, right? There's no squiggly brackets like in a C language, confining an if statement, whatever, right? That's because Python uses white spacing. So right in here, so right in here, white spacing essentially is 4 spaces or a tab. It's best practice to set tabs in like the tab key inside of your editor to be 4 spaces. I don't have that here because I'm a pleb, but that's usually best practice. So then 4 spaces symbolizes a tab, and that's how Python understands what would normally be in curly brackets, right? So from here to here, right? So that's essentially what it's saying. And if you have any questions, if you have any questions about anything, just put it in chat. Or if you think of a better way of explaining it or something to input, say it in chat, and I'll say it out loud. For instance, Brock said the word I was looking for was code block. So inside of here, normally the code block, this would normally be the code block. Instead, we're using this, right? So an if statement, fairly simple. If something is none, right? Which is the equivalent of saying if equals null, right? In your classic C languages, right? But Python uses various natural language terms to help people understand it better and go through objects. For instance, this is actually a comparer of objects. Okay, so if you can use it very similarly to how you use this, but in this case, since we're using the object none, which is the equivalent of null, we're going to use is instead. Okay, so what we're doing right now simply is asking how many times the user would want to loop through in a set of numbers, right? So see how long a loop will go, right? And this right here is a function call. Go down here. Ask user is simply to gain input is input how many times should this loop, blah, 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 whatever, and we're going to force it to be an integer. Okay? Again, we see functions, and we're forcing it to be an integer because Python 3 is slightly weirder than Python 2, but we're going to ignore most of that just for the sake of simplicity, right? Then we're going to operate that loop, right? So simply assigning number of loops inside of here. run that loop, make sure it has a closing statement, so that way it can actually end, it won't run endlessly. And that's basically what we have right now. So let's go in and let's run that now. So Python 3. Oh, my bad. I need to switch OBS to terminal view. Perfect. Okay. So you guys able to see the terminal? Okay. Yeah, it's not a professional move, but it is how I'm going to do this. So inside of your directory, to call a Python script, all you have to do is Python, and then just say the script. So I believe the name is like flow control.py. Okay, so remember the test, print test in the beginning, right? So we're going to do that. And how many times do we want this loop? Remember the if statement where we asked if it's less than 9, it's okay. Otherwise, it's going to ask us to put it out again. So too big, try again. So 9 times. So we'll print out everything 9 times. Okay, so if you notice before, I have declared a list as well as a dictionary, right? Both are obscure data types. Or not both are obscure data types. They're useful data types if you understand them. You can look up more on them later because they're fairly simplistic past like declaration. So the reason why I really like Python for system administration is because you can do crazy for loops to list through objects in an array, which would be a list, or through a dictionary, right? So essentially, for loops in Python operate slightly differently than you expect if you're coming from C or C++. For loops in C++ usually act as go until this condition is met, right? For loops in Python are for object in thing that holds objects, okay? So for variable that I'm stating in list, okay? So I declared list up here, so it's just a bunch of strings, right? So I will say for animal, it could be anything. I could just name it like thing, a, x, whatever, it doesn't matter, right? That's just the variable that I want to represent the object, right? So you can manipulate that inside of the for loop. So if you wanted to, if this was like, well, actually, I'll explain that when we get into here. So like if you want to manipulate a value inside of the for loop, right, of that specific object at that instance, you can just say these variables right here, and those will count as that instance's object, right? Because once it finishes the loop, or finishes that iteration of the loop, it will go on to the next item, right? So really here, the brackets are kind of optional for some of these if you're just going to list out two variables. But that doesn't matter. It's printing. That's very easy Googleable syntax for later. So you can also state 2 values that you want inside of that index or inside of that instance. So you can say, I want to know both key and value in this array of items, right? The items is just a more powerful way of saying iterate through this dictionary, iterate through this complicated data type. Okay, so it will be able to distinguish this is an item, right? So it could have tons of values, right, inside of here. It could be like three long or whatever. I believe, like, let's just do like a floating point, right? There could be 3, right? And it will still understand. It's like, okay, yeah, I want the key, I want the value, whatever, right? And it will still cycle through. So when we do this, what will happen is we'll print through. If we run it now that this is coded out, or actually in the code and not commented out, it will list the numbers up to the number that we input for the number of loops. And then it will list out all of these with both, for the dictionary, it will list the key as well as the value. Okay, so we're going to switch through, save, and switch back to our terminal. And we're going to run this. Whoop. We do it like this. I guess I may have lied to you when I said that. Let's see. Yep, okay, I lied. Okay, so the brackets do matter. I just input the brackets again. So here we go. How many times do you want to go through the loop? 9 times. Prints out 9, and it goes through cat, dog, rat, tuna, tree, right? And it goes C3, B2, Z99, A1. And notice how they're not in any order in particular. That's an important note, because what happens when you actually go through an array of, when you go through a complicated data set, such as a dictionary, it won't guarantee that it's going through in the order that you expect it to, right? Because you're able to do popping things on and off. You're able to add them dynamically, so Python doesn't really concern itself about ordering it, because if you want to think about ordering it, you have to compare, like, do I want to compare the key value? So, like, do I want to compare ABC, or do I want to compare the value that is associated with 1, 2, 3, 99, right? So you can order the dictionary yourself, but it doesn't automatically do that when you list through them, right? But whereas for the lists, it will go through and it will list these in the same order every time. Okay, unless you rearrange it, then obviously it will be different. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit into classes, not a huge amount, because if you don't really understand too much of object-oriented programming, this is basically a little way of understanding the dot operator inside of Python. Okay, so if you guys are following with me, I'm switched back to Atom. Now, if you notice, I don't have a main class for this, right? I don't have, or a main function, right? So like I said before, you're able to just list out a whole bunch of commands, and it's totally cool, and Python's fine with it. So long as you put class definitions and function definitions above it, so then it understands where the information is. Okay, so the class fish is essentially just a basic class where it will generate an object where when you make it, this initializer here will take in itself, so the object itself, and it must have a name. So you're saying, I want to initialize it with a name, and you declare the name in this object instance. So in a new instance, the name will be equal to the name that you place up here. So for understanding, let's just say new name, right? New name, right? So the name value that you're initializing here will be the name that you put in here, okay? And the important thing to note is that when we initialize a new fish object down here, all we have to do is input the new name, so Jerry, right? We didn't actually have to do this self bit. This self bit is the new object itself, okay? As a helpful way of thinking about it, right? And all of these are class functions. There's a lot of fancy stuff that you can do with them, like there's an @ operator that you can use, but this is just enough to get you started on how to actually use a class, right? If you want to use object-oriented. Yeah, so this is a simple way of doing a setter, right? So size, and it will take in the context of the object. So like, what instance is it being used? Like, which object am I, right? So like, it takes in me and whatever size you're telling it to, whatever object you're passing it, right? It doesn't know that it's an integer, whatever, right? So you have to make sure that size is actually an integer and is declared up here. Okay. Or like a float, right? That kind of thing. Just make sure you keep consistent data types, or else Python will really hate you and throw a whole bunch of errors, and it will take you a long time to figure out how to actually do it. Or a long time to figure out the fact that you, just for instance, that you need to force the type through personal experience, right? You need to force that input, right? So the same thing applies here. You have to make sure that you're using integers when you set the size. Okay, and this is just a simple function to say, when you call about, I'm going to look at me. I'm going to just print out my values. So my name, my size. Okay, very simple. And now that we have all that done, we create a new instance of fish called new fish. We do about. So that will print out its name and then size. And then it will do a little divider. And then finally, we're going to set a new size. And we're going to do another about to see if the size changed. So we're going to hop back into terminal. And we're going to do class. Okay. So now if you see this right here, before we set the size, remember how we initialize in the initializer, we set it to 0, right? That stays consistent until you set it yourself, right? So that's simply how you use the dot operator. It's very simple. It's for functions of an object. And now we're going to get into the fun, useful part of Python. So if you had the basic understanding of Python up to this point and you're totally bored, you can tune back in and the fun part can start up. Okay, so now we're going to get into system calls. Ooh, look at this. So you can import the process, like I said before. So subprocess. This will allow you to do shell programming. So you're able to say, I want you to run a subprocess, call a shell, have this as input, and this is just saying I want shell, right? This right here is saying I want shell, I want it, this input, there you go, right? So this will just simply print out, in your Python instance, it will just print out whatever this is, right? And now if you're thinking, wait, if I can get Python to print out a shell statement, can't I technically have that as a variable? And if you thought that, then you're very smart, because you probably read this code and weren't confused like I was when I first read it. So essentially what this is saying is taking the command this, so a string, have shellcode equals true, and then you set a way of taking it out, which is subprocess pipe, right? So what happens is you're setting an output for this value, right? So since it will be taking an output via the pipe operator, and if you're not too familiar with the pipe operator, simply what it does is if you put it at the end of a terminal command or like bash command, you can output that value to a thing, right? or you combine the value. Like it's another process, right? So you do std out, and it will go to here. Okay. And now all it does is you read the output and you strip it. So strip simply removes pointless white spacing, whatever, puts it into this variable, and then it will return the variable. Okay, so that's a long way of saying we can get a shell. We can tell Python to do a shell command via just a general function, and then we can proceed to save that as a variable, which is very useful because that way you don't have to do the very long and boring way of doing it via bash scripting, PowerScript, and stuff like that. So you can just learn Python, and this could be used for Windows or Unix-based system by just changing out these functions, essentially, right? So you get some versatility. So we're going to run this, and we will see what's in my current directory. Okay. Let's just do an ls right here to see what I have, right? So that's just me running ls plain, right? So lists the current directory. Now I want to do classes, or sorry, no, system call, right? So we'll list the same thing, right? And since I did ls minus a, it will show the hidden stuff, the stuff that you don't normally get to see, right? And then here is the other ls, and it will list the same objects as above with a few errors, but you know, you gotta live with some stuff, right? So you can parse through and remove the /n. And the /n is just simply a way for the terminal to like create spaces or like break the line. So you can just parse for that, and you can expect that for later. So essentially, this is just to show you the power of being able to have the variable. Okay, so now to our fun scripts, which I will show off for a bit, and then we'll call it a day. Back to Adam. Now, I know a lot, this is mainly for UOIT and the networking lab for UOIT. I'm not sure if DC students use the same lab as UOIT students, but this is for a Cisco-based environment. So this is we have a clean Cisco device script as well as a login script for secure CRT, right? So secure CRT has terrible documentation. I wasn't able to test these, but these should work. These should work because the only documentation is through example, and I basically manipulated the examples so that it will output or just barely do what I want them to do. So if you do have access to the lab, I don't anymore because if you're not in the intro/advanced networking courses, you can't actually get network access via the normal pod reservations. I'm sure if we talked with the profs, we could have got it, but hindsight's 2020. Yeah, so simply what this login script will do is go through each tab that you have open in Secure CRT, and it will log in for you. So you just basically it will ask you for the login and password, so you don't actually have to hard code it in. It will prompt you for it with a little dialog box. Type them in, ask you for which devices that you want. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right, so if you want the routers, you want whatever, you just like 1, 3, 4, 6, and 8. Right, so whatever devices you want, you just put them in there, and the script will figure it out. And this right here is just the way that we do that. So it uses Python's wonderful ability or built-in function called strip, The dot strip function will just simply separate a string by whatever input you put in. So if you wanted it to separate on commas, you just be like this, right? Or my bad, this, right? But we just want on space, so we'll just keep it plain output. And, or sorry, strip is to remove white spaces at the beginning and end. Split is what I just described earlier. Okay, so normally, if we scroll down here, you can wait for a specific string to show up in the terminal. Okay, so you can wait until certain things happens, and then you can send a command to the screen, right? So realistically, since I don't have access to it, I can't double check what the login statement is, but we're just gonna let the tab sleep for a bit. Hopefully the login page will come up, so we're gonna hit give that tab the username and then hit enter, right? Give it a new line, wait for a bit, password new line, right? And since we don't have the dialog, we're just going to do another wait, right? But what we're going to do is we're going to tab into, we're going to actually send that device, or send a device equal to the for loop up here. So we're going to send the first device that you listed, and then hit enter. So it will complete the login process, and it does a whole bunch of fancy things like that. And it has a little section here, so if you wanted a general way of figuring out a prompt and waiting for that to pop up before you send in an answer, right? So what you can do here is, instead of having to wait and see, like, okay, so it's switch, or it's like this, or if you're on like a Linux, it's like blank space like we saw, so it'll be like user, then files, right? So what you can do is just simply run this code to get the current row. So, for instance, if Adam would be working like a terminal, it doesn't send character by character to the client. It sends row by row. So we get the current row, and we do a quick check to see what the current row is, right? As like XY coordinates here. Okay. And we strip what's in that row. And that will give us something very similar to this. So it will give us that intro little prompt at the beginning of your statements. And you can do this function, you can just basically pass commands through. You just need to finish that up. So it's just a little bit of useful Timbits if you want it. Okay, so again, please test it, let us know. I'll share the GitHub page that we have it with, associated with, because testing would be great. Yeah. And the cleanup devices. So it's annoying to have to manually go into 7 or 8 different devices and say erase reload. So this just does the same thing, loops through all the tabs that you have open, and well, before it does that, it makes sure that you want to erase the startup config and reload, right? So it will loop, once it confirms that you do want it, then it will run through each tab, and it will do the same thing, send commands, wait for the various prompts here, which was useful because I can just Google these. So like, wait until the string erase file system will come up, right? And all this, right? Wait until this thing shows up on the line, and then we're good, right? And then I hit yes, or like just hit all the way through, and we can just call it a day. Yeah, look at that. Very simple. You call it to quit CRT, I think. Not 100% sure, couldn't test it. But call main. And here is a simple cleanup script. Yeah, so thanks for tuning in, guys. It was fun. If you have any suggestion for improvements or different subjects, please let us know. Go to the Facebook group UOIT Nitwits if you are part of the UOIT DC community. Sorry, it's just Nitwits as the club page, so you can go there. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. We're probably going to be streaming the rest of them since coming out to campus or remote users or remote viewers, right? You guys don't want to be left in the dark, so we'll be keeping this going. So, yeah. Oh, and follow us on Twitter, UOIT Nitwits, if you want. I don't really use Twitter too often, so if we get people going there, we'll start doing more social media stuff there. So, yeah, have a great day, guys, and thank you very much for watching.